Afonso Henriques de Lima Barreto wrote the greatest satirical novel of early 20th century Brazil and died in obscurity in 1922, erased from English literature entirely. This is Haberdash Books, where we resurrect the masterpiece's history buried. Lima Barreto was a mixed-race writer in a deeply racist society, writing with unflinching wit about bureaucratic absurdity and national delusion, while European modernists were celebrated in translation. His masterpiece, The Sad End of Policarpo Quaresma, has been trapped in Portuguese for a century. Subscribe and email hello@haberdashbooks.com to claim a full audiobook from our lost library. MP3 download, yours to keep, plus the EPUB when available. Hit subscribe and YouTube will bring you a new forgotten classic every single day. Afonso Henriques de Lima Barreto was Brazil's most incisive social voice in the early 1900s, celebrated by his contemporaries as a fearless satirist and psychologist of human nature. The Sad End of Policarpo Quaresma, published in 1915, was recognized immediately as a masterwork, a novel that dissected Brazilian nationalism, racial hypocrisy, and the chasm between idealistic dreaming and brutal reality with devastating clarity and dark humor. He was read by intellectuals, debated in salons, and acknowledged as essential to understanding Brazil's identity crisis at a pivotal historical moment. But Lima Barreto was mixed race in a profoundly racist society, a civil servant with mental illness, and, fatally, he wrote in Portuguese at a moment when European literature dominated global translation. He died in 1922, aged 41, largely forgotten outside Brazil. His works were never systematically translated into English. The Portuguese language became his prison. Brilliant enough for Brazil, too regional for the world. A single language barrier, combined with the racism that prevented a man of his background from achieving canonical status in his lifetime, erased him from the English-speaking literary consciousness entirely. What makes him matter now is timeless. Lima Barreto understood that patriotism without self-knowledge is delusion, that systems crush idealists not through evil, but through indifference, and that the individual's struggle against bureaucratic absurdity is both comic and tragic. Reading him today feels like discovering a contemporary, because the distance between earnest conviction and social reality he anatomized never actually closed. If you've loved Italo Calvino's playful satire, Machado de Assis' psychological depth, or the bureaucratic absurdism of Kafka, then Lima Barreto's The Sad End of Policarpo Quaresma is exactly what you've been looking for. The complete audiobook is waiting at haberdashbooks.com. Subscribe and email hello@haberdashbooks.com with the subject Lost Library Pass to claim any full audiobook from our catalog free, MP3 yours to keep, EPUB included when available. Refer a friend who subscribes and you both get another free audiobook. The link is in the description.
A note from the translator. I first stumbled upon Lima Barreto while researching early 20th century Brazilian literature, looking for voices that had been overshadowed. And what a discovery it was! Barreto immediately struck me as a brilliant, incisive satirist, a keen observer of human nature and society, with a deeply compassionate heart beneath his sharp wit. Afonso Henriques de Lima Barreto was a singular figure in Brazilian letters, a mixed-race writer in a society struggling with its colonial legacy and an emergent sense of national identity. He was a contemporary of many European modernists, yet his focus remained firmly on Brazil, dissecting its bureaucratic absurdities, its racial prejudices, and its often tragic disconnect between ideal and reality. He matters because he offered an unflinching, often darkly humorous, mirror to his nation at a pivotal time, championing the common person and critiquing the powerful with fearless honesty. For too long, English readers have been denied the full breadth of Barreto's genius. Triste film de Policarpo Quaresma **, or The Sad End of Policarpo Quaresma **, is his masterpiece, a poignant, funny, and ultimately heartbreaking tale that transcends its specific time and place. It's a story about a man's unwavering, almost naive, patriotism and the crushing indifference of the world to his earnest dreams. In bringing Policarpo's story into English, I aim to capture the distinctive flavor of Barreto's prose, his wry humor, his rhythmic sentences, and the subtle, often tragic, undercurrents. I've tried to honor the period while making the language feel fresh and accessible, ensuring that Barreto's social critiques and emotional depth resonate as powerfully today as they did a century ago. Certain cultural nuances, like the significance of a compadre or the loaded imagery of a guitar for a man of Policarpo's standing, are woven into the narrative for clarity, allowing you to fully immerse yourself in his world. So, settle in, dear listener. Prepare to meet Major Policarpo Quaresma, a character you won't soon forget. He's a dreamer, a patriot, and a man who, in his own unique way, teaches us much about the price of idealism. Samuel Chatwin, Haberdash Books, 2026. Quaresma, my dear Quaresma, Quaresma of the heart. Leave the potatoes in peace, leave the beans in peace. You have no knack for this, Quaresma, my asterisk cockambi asterisk. Return to your old obsession of writing in Tupi. Vigilant eye, the major was stunned. What was this? Why, who was it? He could not grasp, he could not find the motive or the root of such an attack. His sister approached, accompanied by her goddaughter. Quaresma handed her the newspaper, his arm trembling. Read this, Adelaide. The old lady immediately saw her brother's perturbation and read quickly and solicitously. She possessed that ample maternity of spinsters, for it seems that the lack of children reinforces and broadens a woman's interest in the sorrows of others. As she read, Quaresma said, "But what have I done? What do I have to do with politics?" And he scratched his already quite graying hair. Dona Adelaide then said sweetly, "Calm down, Policarpo, just for this. Come now." The goddaughter also read the verses and asked her godfather, "Did you ever get involved in the politics here?" "Never. I'm even going to declare that." "Are you crazy?" exclaimed both women at once, with the sister adding, "That would be cowardly. A satisfaction. Never." The doctor and Ricardo arrived from outside and found the three in these considerations. They noticed Quaresma's agitation. He was pale, his eyes were moist, and he successively scratched his head. "What's wrong, Major?" inquired the troubadour. The ladies explained the situation and gave him the quatrains to read. Ricardo then recounted what he had heard in the village. Everyone believed that the major had come there with the intention of getting involved in politics, so much so that he gave alms, allowed people to gather firewood in his woods, distributed homeopathic remedies. Antonino had stated that he would unmask such a hypocrite. "And you didn't deny it?" Quaresma asked. Ricardo affirmed that he had, but the clerk had refused to believe him and reiterated his intentions to attack. The major was deeply impressed by everything, but in accordance with his nature, he incubated the impression for a while, and, as long as his friends were with him, he showed no concern. Olga and her husband spent about 15 days at Sisigo. The husband, after a week, already seemed tired. Excursions were few. Generally, our villages suffer from a great lack of picturesque beauty. There are one or two famous spots. Just as in Europe, every village has its historical curiosity. In Kuruzu, the renowned attraction was the Carico, a waterfall 2 leagues approximately 12 kilometers, distant from Quaresma's house, towards the mountains that blocked his frontal horizon. Dr. Campos had already made acquaintance with the major, and thanks to him, horses and a side saddle were available, allowing the young woman to also go to the waterfall. They went in the morning, the mayor, the doctor, his wife, and Campos's daughter. The place was not ugly. A small waterfall, about 15 meters high, plunged in 3 parts down the flank of the mountain. The water trembled in its fall, as if it coiled itself before pulverizing into a large stone basin, roaring and gurgling. There was abundant greenery, and the entire cascade seemed to live under an arch of trees. The sun filtered through with difficulty, sparkling on the water or rocks in small, round, or oblong patches. Parakeets, A lighter green, perched on branches, were like incrustations in that fantastic hall. Olga was able to see all of this at her leisure, moving from one side to the other because the mayor's daughter was as silent as a tomb, and her father was asking her husband for information about new medicinal remedies. How is erysipelas cured today? Is emetic tartar still widely used? What impressed her most on the excursion was the general misery, the lack of cultivation, the poverty of the houses, the sad, dejected air of the poor people. Educated in the city, she had imagined the country folk to be happy, healthy, and cheerful. With so much clay and so much water, why weren't the houses made of brick and roofed with tiles? It was always that sinister thatch and that sapapo, a type of mud and wattle wall, which revealed the framework of sticks, like a sick person's skeleton. Why, around these houses, were there no cultivated fields, a vegetable garden and orchard? Wouldn't it be so easy, a matter of hours of work? And there was no livestock, neither large nor small. A goat or a sheep was rare. Why? Even on the farms, the spectacle was no more encouraging. All were gloomy, low, almost without a fragrant orchard or a succulent vegetable garden. Aside from coffee and a cornfield here and there, she could not see any other crop, any other agricultural industry. It couldn't be mere laziness or indolence. For his own consumption, for his own use, man always has the energy to work. The populations, most accused of laziness, work relatively. In Africa, in India, in Cochin China, everywhere, couples, families, tribes plant a few things for themselves. Could it be the land? What could it be? And all these questions challenged her curiosity, her desire to know, and also her pity and sympathy for those pariahs, ragged, poorly housed, perhaps hungry, sullen. She wished she were a man. If she were, she would spend months and years there, and in other localities, she would inquire, observe, and she would surely find the reason and the remedy. This was the situation of the peasant in the Middle Ages and at the beginning of ours. It was La Bruyère's famous animal that had a human face and articulate voice. As she was going to visit her godfather's cleared land the next day, she took the opportunity to question the chatterbox Felizardo about it. The work on the cleared land was almost finished. The large tract of land was almost entirely clean and sloped slightly up the hill that formed the ridge of the property. Olga found the fellow down below, chopping the thicker wood with an axe. Anastasio was at the top, at the edge of the woods, raking fallen leaves. She spoke to him. "Good day, sa donna, mistress/madam. So you're working hard, Felizardo?" "As much as one can. I was at Carico yesterday, a beautiful place. Where do you live, Felizardo?" "Over there, on the village road." "Is your property big?" "It has some land, yes, madam, sa donna." "Why don't you plant for yourself?" "Nonsense, sa donna, what would we eat?" "Whatever you plant or what the crop brings in money." Sa donna is thinking one thing and the reality is another. While the plant grows, then what? Nonsense, sa donna, it's not like that. He struck a blow with the axe, the log slipped. He repositioned it better on the chopping block, and before striking the axe again, he added, "The land isn't ours. And the frumiga ants? We don't have tools." "That's good for Italians or Alamo, Germans, whom the government gives everything to." "The government doesn't like us." He struck the axe, firm and sure, and the rough trunk split into two almost equal parts, of a light yellowish hue, where the dark heartwood began to appear. She returned, wanting to shake off that disagreement the fellow had indicated, but she couldn't. It was true. For the first time, she noticed that the government self-help was only for nationals. For others, all aid and facilities, not counting their previous education and support from compatriots. And the land wasn't his. But whose was it then, all that abandoned land found around there? She had even seen closed farms, with houses in ruins. Why this engrossment, these useless and unproductive latifundia, large estates? Her weakness of attention did not allow her to think further about the problem. She walked home, especially since it was dinner time and hunger was setting in. She found her husband and godfather talking. Her husband had lost a bit of his haughtiness. There were even occasions when he was quite natural. When she arrived, her godfather exclaimed, "Fertilizers! Is it possible for a Brazilian to have such an idea? Why, we have the most fertile lands in the world." But they get depleted, Major, the doctor observed. Dona Adelaide silently, intently followed the crochet work she was doing. Ricardo listened, wide-eyed, and Olga interjected into the conversation. What's this anger about, Godfather? It's your husband trying to convince me that our lands need fertilizers. This is an insult. Well, rest assured, Major, if I were you, the doctor added, I'd experiment with some phosphates. Indeed, Major, Ricardo rejoined. When I started playing the asterisk violão Portuguese guitar, I didn't want to learn music. What music? Nothing at all. Inspiration is enough. Today I see that it's necessary. That's how it is, he summarized. Everyone exchanged glances except Quaresma, who immediately said with all the force of his soul, Doctor, Brazil is the most fertile country in the world. It is the best endowed, and its lands do not need loans to provide sustenance to man. Rest assured. There are more fertile ones, the doctor advanced. Where? In Europe. In Europe? Yes, in Europe, the black soils of Russia, for example. The major considered the young man for some time and exclaimed triumphantly, You are not a patriot. These young people. Dinner proceeded more calmly. Ricardo still made some observations about the asterisk violão. That night, the minstrel sang his latest production, Carola's Lips. It was suspected that Carola was one of Dr. Campos's maids, but no one alluded to it. They listened with interest, and he was much applauded. Olga played on Dona Adelaide's old piano, and before 11 o'clock, everyone was in bed. Quaresma went to his room, undressed, put on his nightshirt, and lying down, began to read an old encomium to the riches and opulence of Brazil. The house was silent. Outside, there was not the slightest sound. The frogs had momentarily suspended their nocturnal orchestra. Quaresma read, and he remembered that Darwin had enjoyed listening to this concert from the marshes. Everything in our land is extraordinary, he thought. From the pantry, which was next to his room, came a strange noise. He pricked up his ears and listened. The frogs resumed their hymn. There were low voices, others higher and more shrill. One followed the other, and at a given moment all joined in a sustained unison. They suspended...
You've just heard the opening of one of the finest satires ever written, a novel about a man whose love for his country becomes the instrument of his destruction. The full story awaits. Subscribe, claim your free lost library audiobook, and the complete sad end of Policarpo Quaresma is waiting at haberdashbooks.com.